So welcome everybody to the How We Heal series. Today we're going to be talking about anxiety and depression as the theme. This series is brought to you by members of the Inner Arts Collective. We're a co-working space located on the Danforth, though certainly right now because of COVID especially, many of our members are practicing from home and remotely, and this panel series is being offered also while we practice from home. The series was created as a result of COVID because there were some themes that were coming up in people's practices, but also we want these discussions to be timeless because a lot of the issues that folks are experiencing right now are things that will impact folks for a long time. Anxiety and depression is not new. And likewise, the other topics that we've covered so far, like self-care and managing fear, they're basic human development issues that come up time and time again. So our hope today is to give you resources that will help you work through this pandemic, this crisis, but also be there for you as a resource moving forward and support you and also your loved ones in the months and years to come. If you find that this resource has been helpful for you, we'll be sending the YouTube link. So as you know, conversations will come up for you with loved ones. You can then forward them the link and the supporting document, and they can have access to these very same resources. So our goal is to really just be a resource. That's the primary motive. And it's also been really nice for us to have our members connect across disciplines and within disciplines around what they do and the strategies that they that work for them. It's had this really nice effect of creating cohesion within our community at a time of isolation and separation. So I invite you to please enjoy. And also, I'm very grateful for the questions that folks have sent in advance. We have several questions to work with today. If you didn't get a chance to send any questions in, maybe you registered a little bit later, it's no problem. We have the chat box here and it's there for you to answer any questions. My role for you today, my name is Melanie, and I'll be your moderator. So my main mission is to support you, the audience, in having your questions answered and creating a flow and some timelines so that we can end on time. Our goal is to end at noon. And if it goes like 5-10 minutes over, that's okay. We really just want to make sure that we're here for you in the ways that you need us to be. So to get started, I just want everybody to, take a deep breath, feel centered. Come into yourself and think about something that you're grateful for today. And just enter it in the chat box. Beautiful. This moment to gain knowledge, gardening, planting new plants, flowering vines, sunshine, morning tea, high-speed internet, good health, kind, supportive people, friendships, my support system, having a great job and my health, tea and cuddles with my cat. The rain is clear, the rain to clear the air and the pollen out. Beautiful. Thank you, guys. So to get started, I'd like to introduce our three panelists. The most effective use of time is to have them introduce themselves. So they're going to each take turns to introduce themselves, their practice, as well as what brings them to this conversation, what they've been noticing with anxiety and depression. They'll share a little bit about the perspective that they bring, and then we'll open up the floor for some questions. Who would like to get started?
I can start, Melanie. Thank you very much for the introduction and for sort of setting the stage for our discussion today. And it's lovely to see so many people who've signed in, who want to listen in and to ask questions. So it's very encouraging. One of the things that stops us from being able to get help and to help one another is the stigma around anxiety, depression, and other problems that we face. And the more we talk about it and make this part of our common language, the further we are ahead. So very happy to be here. My background is kind of multifaceted, so I'll give you a little bit of an idea about who I am and how I approach anxiety and depression. But I also want to just mention just briefly what anxiety and depression are. So there are lots of definitions online. I think we really want to get into the discussion and the practical tools, but simply stated, you know, we're looking at changes in people's moods, you know, changes that happen over a period of time and then start to make it difficult to function. So with depression, lower mood, maybe more negative thinking, less hopeless outlook, low energy, tired, fatigue, sad, maybe crying or feeling like you want to cry but you just can't. And then just being really stuck in this kind of state. And then it starts to impact your ability to work, focus, connect with others, focus on your studies, be a parent. And there's help for this. I mean, there's ways out of this. And anxiety is sort of different. It sort of is an overactivation of our nervous system, a preoccupation with worry and a doom and gloom kind of fear-based state of being. And also with anxiety, which we all have from time to time, we're looking at where it then becomes a problem and it impairs our ability to function, to focus, to experience life and to enjoy life. So it's something that we all have. We all have periods of being sad and depressed. We all have periods of being anxious, but it's really when it starts to really affect us in a negative way that I think we want to pay more attention to it. My approach in helping people with depression and anxiety is kind of an integrated approach. So you certainly tap into some of the more traditional Western, you know, medical science on depression and anxiety, which has some benefits, really looking at neurology and brain chemistry. And that's where sort of physicians, psychiatrists can be a real help to us. But I'm also, as a social worker, also have a lot of training in psychology and cognitive behavioral therapies. So how our thoughts and feelings interact. So with that, I would ask people to sort of monitor and track their moods, what's triggering a mood and how they're reacting, to kind of as a way of understanding and becoming more self-aware. But I'm also a yoga teacher and meditation teacher, which has been a real healing journey for me as a person. But I also bring that in my work with clients. So in yoga, it draws on the traditional health knowledge of Ayurveda, which is the traditional health knowledge of India. I'm not an Ayurvedic practitioner, but I certainly draw on that because I think it also offers another way of understanding how we are as humans and how we're all unique. And that some of us have more earth-based personalities. We're kind of easygoing and not, you know, overreacting to things. We're kind of warm and welcoming. But sometimes that kind of personality can also have another side to it when we're imbalanced. And that's where the sadness, depression can come, is from too heavy earth, too much of that kind of heavy energy. Likewise with anxiety, we have too much air, being creative and philosophical and worldly thinking is a great quality, but in its sort of imbalanced state, it can become anxiety. So a lot of my work is helping people to understand that, maybe to use mindfulness meditation as a way to observe thoughts in a detached way, to notice when feelings come up, but then also kind of to develop a little bit of an a la carte menu for people about how do you cope with that? How do you shift and change that? So, my approach is very much about self-discovery and self-awareness, but then also finding ways to get out of that and doing it in a way that is very safe. So pacing that so that, the person is very grounded. So it's like making a braid where you feel grounded and ready, and then you do a little bit deeper self-awareness work, and then you start trying on new things. Get grounded again, self-awareness, how did that work? Try something new. So it's a very slow medicine that takes patience and time.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Maria, would you like to go next?
Sure. I wanted to start by welcoming everyone who's coming and participating, and it's really great to see everyone who's interested. And some of the questions that Melanie told us she got from you guys were they were all really great questions. So I want to thank you for joining and participating. And I come from this because as a therapist, I'm seeing a lot more of these symptom clusters because of the stress that's caused in our lives due to the crisis, due to the changes in our lives. A lot of folks have lost people, lost loved ones. So it's a lot to handle, and love to help as much as possible. I work as a therapist. I've been doing this work for around 3 years, but for several years before, I've been doing community work in domestic violence, so in the mental health field as well. I have a background in mindfulness meditation and yoga, so it's a little diverse, and I take on a feminist, culturally sensitive perspective that's also trauma-informed. And I think I just took on that perspective, seeing clients and feeling that it's really necessary to take into account everyone's social context, that they come, we're not just in this world alone. And I like to take a client-centered perspective as well. So that means, adapting the approach a little bit to each client, seeing what works for them, what doesn't. I do individual sessions with adults. And I think Miranda gave a wonderful little introduction to what depression and anxiety are. And thank you for that. I would just like to note that, these symptoms exist on a continuum, right? And there are certain factors in our lives that can make them better or worse. So I like to start to work with people by understanding where they're at. What is their level of functioning? And how can we work together to identify tools that will help them function better in life? Stabilize them both in terms of their ability to function, but also internally. And that can involve some CBT, some mindfulness skills, but also some sensory motor therapy skills, which involves using the body as a resource and learning to resource the body. A lot of the symptoms in depression and anxiety are so physical, so visceral. So I think it's a really helpful tool. And then I like to work to help people understand what the root causes are. And this helps them to understand what their triggers are and make adjustments that they see appropriate, they see fit, and help them integrate that into their lives. So, of course, this can look different as, people come in with different symptoms, people come in with different needs, but that's kind of a general overview. And that kind of second part involves more psychodynamic skills, more relational skills, as well as the rest. And,
Thank you very much, Maria. I noticed when you were first introducing yourself, you talked about symptom clusters. Can you explain what you meant by that?
I meant like symptom clusters, anxiety is a bunch of symptoms that often coexist together. You know, some of them can be, you know, rapid heart rates, shallow breathing, excessive worrying, spiraling thoughts. You know, it can come with sleep disturbances, digestive issues. So those are kind of symptom clusters, whereas depression has, you know, a bit different symptom clusters like low mood, low energy, lethargy, more negative thoughts as well, but a lot less energy in them.
Right, right. Okay, thank you very much for clarifying. I just wanted to check to make sure we were all on the same page.
Thank you.
Irina, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Irina. I'm a registered psychotherapist. And my educational background is similar to Maria and Miranda, is also in social work and in psychotherapy. I think it's really important to combine the two in our approach and our understanding of anxiety and depression. And I'm just really grateful also to see you all today, some new faces, some familiar faces. It is still such a stigmatized issue, both anxiety and depression, and so it's always really heartening to see people come to events like this and take the time. I think for, you know, in terms of my approach to anxiety and depression, it really came as a response to what I see as limitations in the medical model. So when I first started working as a therapist, I was working in quite a medical environment, and I was doing what the psychiatric complex, what that model told me was the treatment for anxiety and depression. But very quickly, what I saw was clients that I was seeing, it wasn't their first time, it was often their third, fourth, fifth time in therapy. A lot of them were actually mental health professionals, some of them were therapists themselves. So really people that are committed to this work, that had done the work, that were motivated. Some of them had been trained to support others in the work, but I kind of kept seeing. And so what they would say to me is, you know, this treatment felt like it worked for 8 months, 18 months, but then it came back. And every time it comes back, I feel more helpless, more hopeless, more ashamed that I can't beat this thing, more at war with myself. And I found that language really curious, the war with myself. It really mirrors, I think, how we talk about anxiety and depression in our society. We talk about overcoming anxiety or battling depression, this, you know, battle with ourselves. It's quite violent language, and it serves to other anxiety and depression as something that happens to us. And when we do that, I think we're also othering a part of ourselves. Because what I see fairly consistently in my work is people are talking about these symptom clusters, but the pain that I'm seeing is coming through in what that means to us. So, you know, my panic attacks are so bad, I can't go out the door, I can't see my friends, I'm disconnected. Or, you know, I feel no joy and motivation in the things that used to nourish me, so I feel disconnected from myself. I'm really, really suffering. I see the language of suffering and the language of pain in how people come to therapy with these issues. And so my approach has really moved more towards a holistic one. I'm curious about how we might stop othering this part of us that really feels anxiety and depression. And as Miranda was saying, sometimes these things make sense. So if I've lost a loved one, someone's died, depression makes sense. If I'm living with chronic poverty, paycheck to paycheck, and I don't know how I'm going to eat from day to day, anxiety makes sense. And in a global pandemic, anxiety and depression both make sense. At some point, they stop making sense to us, and that's when this language starts to come up. And so my focus is really on, can we make space to not other that part of us? Can we hold ourselves with self-compassion, these parts that are doing their best? And can we recognize that this is our body responding to very real things in our environment and our lives and doing its best. Perhaps it doesn't work for us and it's still doing its best. So I approach it with a combination of mindfulness, somatic therapy, experiential therapy, and I combine these to really support people in recognizing, how do I sit with my suffering, right? How do I recognize this part of myself, and instead of turning away or battling it, hold it with self-compassion? How do I, even when what's happening for me isn't what I want for myself, still hold that self-compassion? And so I suppose my hope for the people that are listening today is, if some part of this resonates with you, if you've done the work and you've read the books and you have been to treatment and you keep coming up against this wall, is there a space for you to really open up to that possibility of, my body is doing its best? And thinking about, what is it that my body is telling me? Is hypervigilance supportive for me because I experience structural oppression? Is capitalism the issue? Is it trauma? Is it relationship? Am I lonely? So even as I say these things, I feel in my body a relaxing, and I'm wondering if people can check in for a moment and just sense what they're feeling throughout this, as I'm talking, but also throughout this workshop. Because I think when we create that expansiveness, when we really hold ourselves, all of ourselves, the dark parts, the really hard and difficult parts, with this self-compassion, with an understanding of our humanity and the basic dignity and worthiness that that provides us with, that's when the opportunity for the changes that we really want actually come up. And that's when I see our relationship to anxiety and depression shift, as well as our experience of it shift. So that's my approach, and that's always my hope for anyone that I work with, as well as the people here today.
Thank you very much. For all of you, thank you so much. You really come with some things that are in common across your disciplines and your approaches, very holistic, very client-centered, and looking at how anxiety and depression are being experienced by the individual. But there are some differences in your perspectives as well. So before we get into our first question from the audience, I just wanted to share, well, all of us, the panelists, wanted to share this poem as an intro for today. It's a poem by Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. So with that, we have our first question, and I think this moves in nicely when we're from this poem, especially around the sense of being alone and working through this. So this is a question from Kenty. I think I've had anxiety for a while, and I'm not sure, but I think it might come from trauma when I was a kid. But my family and friends just don't get it and think I should be able to handle it. Is anxiety more of a modern issue? And how do I know when to get help versus what I can handle alone? So I'd like to hand that over to the panelists. Is there anybody that would like to get started for Kenty?
I can get started. Thank you for the question, Kenty. So there's a bunch of questions all in that. So I will try to answer as many as I can. I know that experiences of childhood trauma are really difficult to, overcome by ourselves without help. If our bodies have adapted to living in environments that are traumatic or chaotic, it's hard to feel safe even when we're in a stable environment. So, it is very difficult. Some of the symptoms can be like hyperarousal, being hypervigilant, feeling unstable, and trauma, especially childhood trauma, unless it's I think there are some forms of trauma that society accepts as being, affecting us negatively, like physical or sexual trauma as children. But oftentimes there are other forms of trauma, like verbal, emotional trauma, that are less, the effects of those are less accepted in our society. And, that makes, as well as the insidious nature of trauma, it makes it difficult to explain to others what we're going through if they don't have that lens, if they don't have that experience. And I think I would also like to invite you to try to move out of the shoulds. What's going on for you? What's the reality? How are you handling it on your own? What are your resources? I think if you're feeling very, very overwhelmed on a regular basis, it's a great reason to reach out for help. And then in terms of the whether it's a modern issue, we don't have statistics for way back when, but there are certain aspects of our lifestyles that make it harder to get back in touch with what's real, to be able to ground ourselves. Like, one thing that I think most people, or a lot of people, find grounding is being in nature. I live in the city. It's hard to be in nature. Or even, if you go in a park, you still hear the cars. So, there are certain aspects of our lifestyle, the lack of movement sometimes, that can make it hard, for sure. And yeah, if anyone wants to fill in any gaps, feel free.
No gaps. Just maybe add to what you said. Thanks, Maria. Really some great insights on trauma. I have a few thoughts I hope are helpful. It's an excellent question. Our understanding of trauma in our modern world really came from the experience of veterans from after the First World War. It was shell shock. So it's when physicians, psychiatrists were starting to understand this common experience that soldiers were having after being in war, and how they were triggered by sounds, by smells, by things that would then remind them as if they were back in battle, back in the war zone, and re-experiencing the very visceral fear that first experience imprinted on them. And then since then, we've started to understand it in a much more complex way. And post-traumatic stress disorder, is understood not just in, veterans who come back from war, but more around the various ways that people experience trauma in life, whether it's witnessing a violent incident or being the victim of violence and abuse. It's all very real, and the reliving of that experience can last many years. A couple of comments about particularly the kind of trauma that is experienced in childhood, and where the perpetrator especially is a caregiver or a loved one, somebody that is in a position of authority over us, in particular child sexual abuse. Often, that dynamic, that experience happens in isolation, and the only people witnessing what happened is the person who's being victimized and the perpetrator. And part of what therapy does is it allows you to tell your story and to have the therapist witness your story in a safe and supportive way. And being able to tell your story and share your experience is very healing and cathartic. Very difficult, very painful, but also getting through that, very healing. So therapy is another way for someone to witness your pain and your experience. I also want to talk about the importance of grounding, that because fear is such a common emotion with post-traumatic stress, that being able to feel grounded and safe is a really important thing in doing the deeper work of healing from trauma. And I think a good therapist will help you to do that. There's lots of resources online about, how to ground yourself, how to keep yourself in the present moment so that the memory of the past isn't feeling like it's happening now. The other is just some cautions and comments about substance use. Alcohol, cannabis, other drugs are very common as a way to deal with symptoms of anxiety. So, as much as possible, pacing ourselves as we move through this healing work, that the grounding is happening in a way that when we recover the memories and tell the stories of the trauma, we're not then self-medicating with a lot of alcohol or other drugs. We want to be able to move through the pain in a way that's safe and grounded. And then last, just a comment about social support. I always ask people to just, on a paper, we kind of work together and just write down all your social supports, and then kind of name what each of those people offer you and what they don't offer you. Not everybody is going to offer you patience, kindness, and listening. They might offer you an activity to do that'll distract you. They might be somebody who's really good at making you laugh, but they're not a great listener. So just sort of do an inventory of your social supports and pick and choose who are your people that you can talk to and who are the people that you can get other things from. And then you won't necessarily be quite as disappointed or frustrated that people don't understand, because not everybody can hear your story and can kind of hold the space that you need for all the emotions that come with it. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to the next question. Maybe Irina, you can get started with answering that one. Let's see. I'm very empathic and intuitive, and am feeling like I pick up on other people's sadness and stress. How do I know what's mine and what I'm absorbing from others? And if it's mine, how can I tell if it's intuition or stress or anxiety? Would you mind starting with that one, Irina?
Yeah, for sure. What a great question. I think that the way that I approach this is really twofold. One is to support, how can you support yourself to start to differentiate between the two, and we'll talk about that. And then the second part is just how can you support yourself? So from a neurobiological perspective, we know that as social creatures, we actually have mirror neurons in our brain, and this is what allows us to experience what someone else is experiencing. So when, for example, with Melanie, if you were in some sort of pain, and I witnessed that, the same parts of my brain would light up as if I was experiencing the pain. And the best example of it is if you've ever been fortunate enough to be in the room with many babies, and you notice one of them starts crying, all of a sudden, usually all of the other babies start crying. They're very vulnerable, and their mirror neurons are very, very sensitive, and they're looking out for one another, but also for themselves. So this is a very real, people talk about being an empath. This is a very real experience that's starting to be backed by neuroscience, which is really exciting. And then, from that space of being an infant and feeling these things, some of us develop more capacity to differentiate between ourselves and another, and other people don't develop it as much. And so in your question, I think one of the things that I would invite you to do is to build your capacity to recognize, what does intuition feel like for myself? So from a mindfulness perspective, you could spend some time maybe doing a visualization exercise. So maybe putting your hand on your chest, closing your eyes, and just being with the breath for a few moments. And asking yourself, what does it feel like when I'm in my intuition? What image comes up? Maybe it's a flower, a flower garden, and there's the sunshine kind of coming down on your face. Maybe you're in a forest, maybe you're in your favorite place in your home. And then sort of get a feel for what that feels like in the body as well. And then start to think about, what does it feel like when I'm overwhelmed with anxiety, stress, depression? Perhaps you're in the same place, but it's raining in the garden, or there's a snowstorm in the woods, or your favorite place is not your favorite place anymore. Perhaps you're somewhere else. The reason that I think it's important to do this is to really start to have a sense of, how do I feel when I'm in my intuitive place, which is a really grounded place, and when I'm in a place where I'm not doing well, which is less grounded. And the other thing that I can say is, offering yourself support regardless of what you're experiencing will support you to become more grounded and to build the capacity to sort of differentiate for yourself. So some tools that mindfulness therapists and mindfulness practitioners use that I can offer you is sometimes when I'm in a session and particularly difficult, I might imagine that there is kind of a ring of light between myself and the other person. And so what they're saying is filtered through, but it's changed in that experience to something that I can sit with and something that I can handle. Or I could imagine a waterfall. I could imagine maybe even a ring of or wall of fire if you have no negative associations with fire. So again, just really sort of differentiating for yourself. And in that space, you can also just ask yourself, is this mine? And really see what comes up, tapping into the wisdom of your body and your wise mind. It will communicate to you. You might not know what that language looks like, but the more often that you ask yourself, the more that you sit with what you're actually experiencing, rather than skipping ahead to trying to figure out, what does this mean and how do I manage it? Just sitting with it, is this mine? So that's, I think, a really good starting point. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add.
I think that was a great answer. Yes to everything, and totally agree with it. The more you learn to differentiate, the easier it gets, the more automatic it gets. I think the only thing I would like to add are something that can be very helpful is, when you get back home, when you get back to yourself and your time alone, is to do something to mark the transition, to invite yourself to either let go of whatever it was that that shared space was, so you can check in again. And that can be, some people like to turn on a song and dance for 5 minutes, or even something as simple as washing your hands or lighting some incense or room spray, whatever it is, just to invite you to come back home to yourself after being with others.
I'll just add one small point. Is one of the benefits of a mindfulness meditation practice is you do become more aware of your own thoughts and feelings. But at the end of that, unintentionally, one of the fabulous outcomes of that is that you also find within yourself a new compassion for other people. And it's really only through that journey of understanding your own thoughts and emotions that compassion for other people opens up. So if other people have intense emotions that are difficult for us, as we shift our mind to see that person as somebody who is suffering, and in their suffering, we can sort of change our mindset unintentionally. It just sort of happens to view them as suffering and to have compassion for them.
Thank you so much. I have a question here from Amy. So first I'll give you a little bit of context for Amy's question. A time when I had unexpected mental health issues for a week or so. I was missing deadlines at work, but basically too scared to be honest with clients about the reason why. If anything, seeing my own fears around having those conversations helped me understand why mental health is still hugely stigmatized in the workplace. Her question: how do I talk about unexpected mental health issues to employers and business clients? Who would like to take that on?
I can get started.
Okay.
I mean, so firstly, I'm sorry that that's an experience that you had. It's already so difficult to live with these things and to worry about how it's going to be perceived by our employers when we need that money to live and to survive. It's not, it just feels very unjust to me. And I just wanna kind of put that out there. My perspective on this is that it's very individual. So I'm happy to talk about strategies to talk about these things if that's what you've decided to do. But I also want to give some time and space to the idea of it's not always safe to do that. And I think it's important to recognize. So I've worked with people that have had that conversation with employers and had amazing support and I've worked with people where that hasn't happened. So I think it's important to really recognize for yourself the costs and benefits of both talking about it and not talking about it. Certainly, you know, from a human rights perspective, with employers, you don't need to discuss the specifics of a medical challenge, right? You can get a doctor's note and just say, I need more time, I need more, you know, a deadline to be shifted, I need my hours reduced or extended. So that's something that's available for you, and I don't think there's any shame in choosing that route. My advice, if you've decided to have that conversation, is to approach it with the understanding of how can I communicate this? And if it's not met with what I need, I know that I can still be grounded. So rather than perhaps going in right away with, you know, this is what I'm struggling with and this is what it looks like for me, if that's going to be really hard, if it's met with a lack of support, just saying, I'm struggling with some mental health issues right now, and this is what I need. I find that employers, in coaching clients through this, I find that employers really respond well to solutions, right? So rather than coming in with an open thing, saying, this is what's happening for me, this is what I need. And then they have something to grasp onto, and then the conversation becomes around, can I offer you this, or how do we kind of negotiate this? How can we work together? So that is my advice around how to approach it. And in terms of, you know, speaking to clients about it, you have a little bit more freedom there. And so again, I just always advise people, be grounded in this situation as much as possible. Practice that grounding. It can be really helpful to run through a script with a supportive friend, with your therapist, with a peer support before going in. And just recognizing for yourself that the reason you're feeling anxious is that it is still stigmatized in our society. So it's not a personal issue, it's a societal issue, and we need to think about that as well.
Maybe I could just add to that. I mean, excellent points, Irina. I think that employers are more and more starting to understand the impact of stress and mental health problems in the workplace and how it relates to productivity and people being off, taking sick days, and overall sort of body health as well. You know, neck pain, back pain, digestive problems, sleep problems, all have a stress component. So I think employers are more and more understanding the importance of good mental health as you know, a way to have a good workforce. But it also, workplaces can also reflect the wider culture where there's a stigma about talking about being stressed and asking for help for that, or people have a lot of reticence about identifying that they're struggling because of the stigma. You know, a couple of suggestions I have is using the you know, annual events that seem to, you know, always come to us, like Mental Health Week or the Bell Let's Talk Week, using those times when the kind of bigger world is talking about mental health, mental illness, and about resources, is use those maybe as opportunities to start to change the culture in your workplace. See if you can invite some guest speakers in, or get your coworkers to participate in some of the campaigns. And then that starts to, you know, change the culture of the work environment so people can begin to talk a little bit about their struggles. And once one person starts to talk, another person talks, another person shares, and you'll find that actually a lot of people are having a very common experience. So I would take advantage of what's out there. There's a lot of resources on these, you know, various weeks, Mental Health Week, and, you know, all of those suicide prevention weeks, etc. They're great opportunities to bring a conversation in so that when individuals find themselves stressed and needing help, there's already a bit of a foundation in the work environment to talk about those issues.
Thank you. I noticed that in your responses, there was a focus on the workplace, but what if somebody has clients? What if they are maybe self-employed and they have some contracts out and they have to explain, or, you know, how would you suggest they broach that with clients?
I think something that is a helpful framework to have is, to think about how would you explain it if it was a physical illness or a physical issue. How would you talk about that? How much details or lack of details would you give? And, how much would you invite yourself to use that as, a way to give yourself space? And, some people find it difficult even to talk about that. So, ask, it's always great to ask, people you respect and care about how they would do that, how they would navigate that.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. So I have a question from Sam. Sam has a family member who's really struggling with depression, and they don't want support. So it's apparently clear that they have depression. They don't want support. As somebody they trust, how can I help them?
It's a great question. I'll just mention that we are going to be posting some resources in the chat box or after the session, because an hour on depression, anxiety is just tipping, not even the iceberg. It's just such a little small piece of the whole story. So I know Melanie, all the facilitators, all the presenters on the panel have given some links and suggestions for follow-up. So my advice to somebody who, sees, depression, anxiety, or some struggles in someone in their family, their spouse, someone close to them, I think just become educated, learn, read, watch videos, sort of develop your own understanding of that. And in particular, if it's somebody that you're in a close relationship with, you need to also do your own self-care within that. The stages of change model of how behavior changes in people is a really good thing to also look for. I'll put it in the chat box just so you can do a search on it. Not everybody understands that they are struggling with depression or anxiety. And until they understand it, they're not really going to be able to know what to do with it. So if you're in a support role and you see that someone you love is struggling, educate yourself and get some self-care. And then that will kind of be your good starting point for trying to support and help them.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add anything?
Okay. I can add.
Okay.
Just really quickly. Yeah, I think the importance of supporting yourself and educating yourself cannot be overstated. And I also think with depression, one of the functions of it, one way that it can be constructed is extreme loneliness and extreme disconnection. And so when people are depressed, oftentimes the mind, as it ruminates, it's looking for evidence of these circular thoughts that we have about ourselves, right? So I can't get support. This isn't available for me. It's impossible. So continuously show up in a gentle way for this person. And that doesn't mean you're pushing them necessarily before they're ready, depending on the stage of change that they're in. But to consider, just even to check in, to say, hey, I just want to check in. I'm here and I'm available. And doing that on a regular basis, reminding the person that they have community. If this is someone that you live with, even perhaps modeling certain behaviors. I'm going to meditate. Do you want to join me? I'm going to go for a run. Do you want to join me? I think the consistency of the connection can often be a lifeline for folks. And it can feel like a really small amount, and there's this urge and this drive to do more. I think it's important to recognize that that can feel tremendously supportive for a person who's sort of in the bowels of depression.
Thank you very much. We have an anonymous question about affording sessions. I can't afford sessions. Are sessions with any of you covered by OHIP or ODSP? How would I book a session and then get it covered? And actually, in addition to this, while you're responding, maybe if you could touch also on insurance companies, because there was another question that had come in related to accessing benefits and not being sure about that process. And so accessing services that they need professionally and getting the support for payment. Any suggestions?
So I know that, to start with that, OHIP and ODSP don't cover our services as private practitioners. But, some of the free services, if you need them and you can't afford, and you don't have extended benefits through your workplace. I know a lot of hospitals have some free programs, some group programs. And I know there are some walk-in services for adults. There's a place called Wood Green. I can add the links to, and then there's like a few places that I know that do walk-in services free for youth. One place is called Skylark and East Metro Youth Services. Yeah, I saw you added CAMH, that's great. Yeah, CAMH has a lot of services as well. And in terms of our services, how to get them covered, it's great to call, like to pick the practitioner you want to work with, see their credentials, and call your insurance company to see what the details are of the coverage, because what package you have and each insurance company kind of differs. I know some practitioners have, there's a service they have, I don't remember what it's called, where they have a link with some insurance companies, so the insurance company will directly pay for them, but most of the time it's, you have to pay up front and then you get covered by the insurance. Yeah.
I can add to that as well.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, therapy should be free. I think we can all agree on that, and it should be OHIP covered. Unfortunately, it's not unless it's performed by a medical doctor. So I'm happy to send Melanie a list of medical doctors that provide OHIP covered psychotherapy, but unfortunately the waiting lists are very long. What I would suggest too is what I always say to people is rate your MPP and state that this is something that you want to be covered. There's a lot of petitions that are going around by psychotherapists right now looking for this. But in the immediate support, to find support for yourself in the immediate moment, there are these walk-in counseling through Wood Green, Toronto Family Services. There's also for youth Stella's. I don't believe that you mentioned that one, Maria. And there's also community health centers. So if you just Google community health center, there's usually one for the area that you live in. They have social workers on staff that can offer support. It's a bit of a wait, not as long as the doctor. And it is OHIP covered in that case as well. Beyond that, in terms of insurance and finding support with us, there's many psychotherapists, myself included, that have a sliding scale. So you can reach out to your individual therapist or to the therapist of your choice to see if they have a sliding scale. There's also the Affordable Therapy Network of Toronto, which lists some therapists that do lower cost therapy. So it's not a perfect system, and we know that. And so we do try to work our hardest to support people as best as we can and to refer out when we can. And so if all of these things are not available, if they feel overwhelming, you can also reach out to someone. And if they don't have that sliding scale spot, or if it's not affordable to you, generally speaking, we will work with you to try to find you something that will be affordable and accessible to you.
Yeah, the affordability of private therapists is a real challenge. I think maybe starting off with having a bit of an understanding about what you need is a good place to start. If it's a crisis support service, if it's urgent, if you're thinking of suicide, and you really just can't see beyond tomorrow, I know we'll be posting some of these crisis resources. So I do encourage anyone who is struggling with, more imminent crisis, to reach out to those services. They are free, they are accessible, and they are 24/7. And also tap into what's out there that is available to you. So I've put in the chat box the Bounce Back program, which is offered through Canadian Mental Health Association of Ontario. It's an online program focused on helping people who are dealing with anxiety and depression to do some guided self-help. There's a lot of great resources, and reading and online tools. But if you feel you need to talk with someone, then family physicians often, if they're in a family health team, they may have other psychotherapists, social workers, or nurse practitioners in their office. So see if your family physician has any resources. And if you find a private therapist that you would like to work with, most will do a free half-hour consultation. You certainly don't want to be signing up to work with someone and then to get there and find that it's really not a good fit. So most private therapists will do a half-hour free consultation, and then you can get an idea if this is someone you'd like to work with. And my experience is that most therapists are flexible and can negotiate their fees. And it's probably the most awkward conversation to have with private therapists, both for me sitting in this chair and for the person who's asking for help. But many, if you are employed and have a private insurance program, see if registered social workers, psychotherapists, psychologists are covered. Most of the times they are, but it would be a co-payment arrangement. But if you really don't have the financial means, I would definitely look for the resources that are available and accessible to all Ontarians, all Torontonians. And then if you have a private therapist that you think you'd really like to connect with, open up the discussion about a more flexible fee option.
Thank you very much. So that wraps up our panel discussion today. To close, we have a poem to share with you again. This one is a poem by Mary Oliver, and it's called Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. So I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us today. It was a very moving talk. I was moved several times and I learned a lot today. I know that the struggle with anxiety and depression is very real, and a lot of people experience it. Many of us are touched ourselves, or somebody that we love is touched very closely by anxiety and or depression. So I do encourage you to check out the resources that we'll be sending following this video in the supporting document, and follow up with any of our panelists. If you have any further questions, they're here to support you. Next week, we're doing a one-on-one interview on resilience through crisis with Tom Perrick. He's an addictions counselor and also uses mindfulness in a lot of his work. And, you know, this is really the goal is to create more resilient people through all this. And when struggle and crisis happens, we have the opportunity to make them teaching moments and to rise to the challenge, to reach out for support and the resources that we have within us, and to cultivate the resources around us. So I hope today has been helpful for you, as do the panelists, because this is what we're committed to doing. And if you do have any further questions, please reach out. We're here for you. And in the meantime, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. In closing, you can feel free to mention in the chat box if there's anything that you would like to close with. And in the meantime, I also encourage each of our panelists to say farewell and adieu.
Thank you for joining us so much. It was lovely, having this opportunity to talk to everyone, and I really hope that it was helpful. So thank you for joining, and thank you for participating.
Yes, I echo the same thank you to the participants, the questions that helped to guide our discussion, the other panelists, your wisdom, and I learn every time I do sessions like this, I learn from you as well. And Melanie for being an excellent moderator, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, for arranging this. Thank you, Miranda and Maria, and for everyone who attended. I just feel so heartened, and my heart feels so warm anytime we can connect like this. So I hope it was supportive. I know it was supportive for me, like others have said, and I'm just feeling really grateful this morning for all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful week, everybody.